Welcome to a new episode of the EADV Podcast. In this special episode, Professor David Berker speaks with Dr. Eugene Tan, an academic dermatologist based in New Zealand, about his open access article, Plastics in Dermatology, a Review and Solutions, recently published in the JEADV. Together, they examine the growing concern around plastics in dermatological practice, from topical formulations and packaging waste to the long-term environmental and health risks of micro and nanoplastics. What are the true impacts of plastics in our field? What do we really know about their safety? And what practical steps can dermatologists take to make a difference? But before we get into that, we are excited to announce you can now register for this year's Congress hosted in Paris and online from the 17th to the 20th of September 2025. The EADV Congress is one of Europe's largest international meetings dedicated to dermatology and venereology. Over 4 packed days, you explore a comprehensive program covering the full spectrum of specialties. Join delegates from around the globe to exchange knowledge, connect with like-minded professionals, and advance your career. Visit eadv.org/congress to learn more. Stay tuned to learn why sustainability in dermatology starts with awareness and how individual choices can ripple into global change.
So welcome everybody to another fabulous EADV podcast, which I believe you can see us as well, which must be a bit of a shock for you. But anyway, so I'm delighted to have Eugene Tan with us today, who's talking to us from Topo in North Island, New Zealand. And as part of the normal introductory spiel on these things, we're just going to say a couple of words. Well, I'm going to say a couple of words and he's going to say a couple of sentences about ourselves. So Eugene, tell us just a little bit about yourself.
Well, thanks very much for having me on this EADV podcast, David. So I am an academic dermatologist. I'm affiliated with the University of New South Wales in Sydney, and I'm also a Mohs micrographic surgeon. I trained in Australia, but now I live in New Zealand in a small rural town called Taupo. And me and my partner were very passionate about sustainability. So we live in an acreage, we grow our own food, we maintain our own beehives, and we live a car-free life. So we basically cycle everywhere.
Wow. I suspect the audience is already thinking, we've not met a guy like this very often. So, and also because you live a long way away, we're not likely to meet you soon either. But that sounds an extraordinary life. And you, of course, will give you enormous insight into many things. And that's why it's great that you've written this article in the JEADV, which has sparked this interest more broadly in the readership and the editorship. And I've been asked to interview on this. Now, my credentials are that I'm a dermatologist in the UK and long-standing member and previous board member of the EADV. And I was a part setter-upper of the climate working group in the EADV, and I'm a member of the BAD, British Association of Dermatologists, Environment and Sustainability Group. And so you might worry that you've got 2 like-minded people talking to each other on this topic today, which is the role of plastics in dermatology and its impact in the world and the environment in particular, and also on the practice of dermatology. But if I go back to the beginning of that sentence, you might worry that you've got 2 like-minded people talking to each other. I am aware that the EADV is just such a fantastic institution and manages to address the concerns of people who come from very different backgrounds in different parts of Europe. And for some of you, plastics will be an absolute life send, and you rely on them every day, and you need them both in your products and how you package your products and just in your domestic life. And for others, you will have a different view, maybe, that you can see them as a problem for us, something that we see both in the environment as a clutter and a mess that doesn't go away because it's cumulative, and also potentially something that's toxic both in its production and in its effects as nanoparticles. So we're trying to embrace both sides of that argument today. So I will ask Eugene some fairly tough questions, I hope, in order to tease out the different angles on this topic. So I'm going to kick off with just the broad brush, which, so just give us the name of your article Eugene, if you could, so that people have this all in context. And I'll then kick off with the questions.
Okay, so the name of our article is Plastics in Dermatology, a Review and Solutions, and it's written by myself and my two co-authors, Dr. Dennis Niebel and Dr. Suzanne Saha. This article is available as open access, courtesy of my university, and I'd encourage all of you listening to this to read it.
Excellent. So reading it would be a very good start before you even listen to this podcast. But if you haven't read it, the ideal thing is after this podcast, you think, well, why haven't I read it? And then you go on and read it. So at the beginning, do nanoplastics really harm us? Is it really true they harm us, Eugene? Tell us about that.
Yep. So you basically touched on the heart of the three of us writing this manuscript. And when I say the heart of it, it is the heart of our frustration whilst writing this manuscript. And the reason being is the large part of the evidence, for instance, with microplastics, the evidence comes from in vitro experiments or animal models. Now, if you're talking about the actual plastic chemicals themselves, we do have more human data. But if you were to review it in the lens of the Oxford Evidence-Based Medicine or the EBM scale, very few studies exceed class 2C, which is ecological studies. Most of the human studies are in class 4, which is case series and case reports. So class 4 is basically second lowest rung of evidence. So when we wrote this manuscript, that is definitely the challenging aspect, not just for us, but anyone writing about plastics, is generally fragmented, low quality evidence. However, I would like to use this as a parallel to cigarette smoking and lung cancer, and that is, we never had randomized control trials with cigarette smoking, but what we do have is a very important point, which is converging lines of evidence. So we have the animal models, the in vitro experiments, and the population-based studies all converging to the point of harm. And the same is true for plastics as well. And that is, everything points towards harm. We have absolutely no studies that is pointing for a benefit for these microplastics being in our bodies. So the recommendations that we write about in this manuscript is not just our personal opinion, but it aligns with recommendations from organizations such as the World Health Organization and the United Nations Environment Program.
Right. And I mean, if you take so I guess perhaps we ought to wheel this back a fraction, because I have read the article and I am a bit, the people who are listening to us may not have a full understanding of the distinction between nanoplastics and microplastics, which you have brought out in your article. And probably you don't use the term macroplastics, but even macroplastics are a bit of a pain in the neck. So do you have a way of classifying plastics so people know where you're at when you're talking about nano?
Yeah, the definition of a microplastic is anything less than 5 millimeters, and nanoplastic is anything less than 1 micrometer. I personally feel that this distinction is just a random line in the sand, because that's why you have that collective term micro nanoplastic. And the point of mentioning that is the fate of every single plastic that has ever been produced since 1907 is to become a micro nanoplastic. So the distinction of, is it 5 millimeters, is it one micrometer, what sort of nanometers, it's kind of it has a nice categorical feel to it, But in terms of practical and clinical value as such, I'm not sure, because they're always a mix and they're always present together, and it is just the end fate of all plastics.
Okay. And what happens to nanoplastics once they've stopped being nanoplastics? Where do they go? What happens to them?
Very good question. Well, I'm not an environmental chemist, but the literature points at this stage to it hanging around for decades. And when I say decades, I'm meaning at present, exceeding the lifespan of a human being. So we're looking at these things being around for generations. We don't actually have data of it saying, oh, this plastic will last exactly 567 years. We don't have precise numbers, because remember, all of this evidence is relatively new. If you were to look at the term microplastic, I mean, that was just recently coined. So to fully yet understand the impact of nanoplastics and microplastics, we're only just having research into this.
And one of the things you bring out in your article is that plastics is a very broad term. It applies to a lot of things that, whilst they have some factors in common or features in common, they are actually it is a wide range of products. So within the world of plastics, do you feel that there are some good plastics and some bad plastics? And does that enable us to have some choice, or can exert some pressure in terms of plastics that we advocate and those that we are expressing a preference against?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because you raised actually quite a poignant point right at the start. And that is, plastics is not one product, but rather it is so heterogeneous, in the sense that by altering the length of the polymer chain and by putting in different additives, you can get a completely different product with a completely different property. So plastic is actually incredibly, incredibly heterogeneous. And to be honest, it's actually quite a miraculous invention, actually. So much so that I don't think that we'd be able to practice medicine as doctors without plastics. Unfortunately, to answer your question of good versus bad plastics, we at present cannot manufacture plastics without harming the human and the planet. Okay, so that's why we spent quite a bit of time in the manuscript talking about the life cycle of plastics. And by life cycle, I mean manufacturing, distribution, use, and disposal. So every stage of the plastic life cycle imposes harm towards humans and the planet. And I'll just briefly go into this just so that people can understand how complex this is. So when you think about, okay, plastics, how do you get plastics? Well, the raw material of plastics comes from extraction of crude oil. Well, how do you get crude oil? Well, you have to dig a massive hole, or you fire water at high pressure to try and access oil that's too deep to dig for, also known as fracking or hydraulic fracturing. What's the problem with those? Well, hydraulic fracturing, for instance, you lose Earth's precious fresh water irreversibly. Okay, so you could use up to about 36 million liters of water per well. Okay, so that's harm in the accessing raw products. And then you've got the creation of the plastics themselves, polymerization, condensation, all these chemical additives. Within the factory itself, employees are exposed to these chemicals. They leach out into the environment. You distribute it to consumers. Consumers then have leaching of these chemical products, which they then apply on their skin, for instance, if you're using our topical products. And then once this product's been used, say the plastic packaging, you then aim to either recycle it or throw it away. Well, let's look at recycling. Recycling is abysmal. Worldwide recycling rates are less than 10%. Okay, so you dispose of it. Well, you could dispose of it in landfill. However, most developed countries ship all their plastic waste to less developed countries that are less well equipped to deal with this waste. So what happens to it? They burn it. So unfortunately, at present, we don't have such a thing as a good plastic, but rather in terms of plastics in general, every stage of the life cycle causes harm. But this conversation inevitably will lead to, well, what about bioplastics? It sounds pretty sexy because it's got a bio in front of it. The answer is it's not that straightforward either, because a bioplastic may be made from plant material, because remember, plastics is created from the hydrocarbon backbone. You can easily get that hydrocarbon backbone from plants too. But if you create the bioplastic and you've got harmful plastic chemicals being added to it, such that when it degrades, these chemicals leach out, then it's not such a great alternative either. But if you're making it from plants, you've got these plant-based waxes and it degrades, that you can put it in your compost and it degrades basically into just carbohydrate chains, then it's a good alternative. So I wish I could give you a simple answer, but I can't. The answer is not so simple with bioplastics either. So what do I propose? Well, what we propose in this manuscript is, yes, it's complex. We don't have a magic wand, but the single biggest thing that we can do at the moment is really to minimize and limit wasteful use of plastic within our specialty. There are many, many things that we can do to try and to limit this waste. And a large part of this is specified in the manuscript. And a lot of actions can be taken. Like, for instance, we have an action plan listed out in Table 2.
Great Table 2. I love Table 2. No, okay. So I guess it's not the kind of event where I think we'll run through Table 2, but it is full of good ideas, and I can see that it's relevant to the dermatologists themselves. What about patients? Do you feel that this is something that patients should have an awareness of within the realm of their own dermatological care?
Yes, in fact, I've had patients that have approached me about this matter as well. So I remember even years ago, before I had this deep interest in it, I've had patients approach me about the issue of microplastics within topical preparations. But I think getting back to what you said about actions that we can take, I think first and foremost, we as dermatologists, we need to be aware of that issue, and that awareness is important because then we can talk to patients about this issue. And that, without going into details of the actual manuscript, simple things such as, if you're buying a personal care product, if you're buying a skincare product, you can check for the presence of microplastics in this. For instance, there's the Beat the Microbeat app, which will allow you to scan your product and it'll tell you whether or not the product contains microplastics. This is actually quite an important aspect because consumers have a lot of power, because from their purchasing decisions, they can impose stress upon the pharmaceutical companies to say, hey, look, we prefer to have these products that do not have microplastics. But as a whole, us dermatologists and our patients, working together and in unison at a global scale is really important. Like, for instance, we need to strengthen regulation about the use of microplastics and plastic chemicals. Okay, and this needs to occur within the framework of REACH, which stands for Regulation, Evaluation, and Authorization of Chemicals in the EU, or the Food and Drug Administration in America. The reason why this is an issue is that within microplastics, we have over 500 microplastic ingredients within personal care products, with, acrylates, copolymer, and polyethylene being the most common. With plastic associated chemicals, we have more than 16,000. Now, REACH in the EU have regulated and banned 6%, but the other 94% is still out there. A third of that 16,000 we know definitely causes harms to human health, but a quarter of those, we don't even have basic information about their chemical identity, let alone, harms to human health. So this is why, acting globally and acting pressure on a personal, societal, legislative nature is really important. But I think, David, the biggest obstacle we face actually is lack of awareness. So especially in our specialty. And that's why I'm thankful that EADV has given our manuscript the attention, because without awareness, we can't take action.
Now, one of the points you mentioned in your article is the using plastics as an ingredient in a cream, to give texture. And what will that be listed as? Because when you talk about raising awareness, it is partly to do with how do people know a way of intervening or contributing to solving the problem. They may have general awareness and be concerned, but they say, well, what do I do about it? Plastics are everywhere and I don't always know where they are in any particular chemical pathway. So what are the names of things that are on the ingredients lists of creams that will be the kind of plastics you're talking about?
Yeah, there's over 500, and there's actually more that's being added to the list as well, David. So acrylates, copolymer, and polyethylene is the most common one.
So acrylates,
really,
copolymer,
copolymer, and polyethylene. Okay. So they are the two that's most common. But the Beat the Microbead app, which is sanctioned and promoted by the United Nations Environment Program, it's an app on your phone. So you basically bring it up onto the ingredients list, and it'll actually tell you what specific microplastic is present. So it's pretty cool. But the Plastic Soup Foundation actually has a list of skincare products which they certify that is microplastics free. So that will help drive consumer preference as well. But the point that
I want you just to repeat those, because as a podcast we don't produce any written material, and you've given us two, at least I'm not aware of any written materials being produced. So you've given us 2 points to make contact with. That people might want to jot them down. There's two websites there. The one for the app, which the app's called?
It's called Beat the Microbead.
Beat the Microbead. Okay, because a lot of people, it's not English, isn't their first language for their listening to this as well. So Beat the Microbead. And the second one you'll stick into Google?
It's called the Plastic Soup Foundation.
The Plastic Soup Foundation. Both pretty memorable terms, those. So worth looking up. Jot them down. Go and do a bit of homework after this podcast, or whilst you're listening to the rest of the podcast, even. Okay, yes, go on. Sorry, I interrupted you. I just interrupted you completely that you. Go on then. Yeah.
What the point you raised is what are they doing in our skin products in the first place? And I wish that you could direct that question towards the cosmeceutical or the actual companies themselves, because the theory is that it's supposed to improve texture, spreadability, etc. But I'm not sure if I accept that line of reasoning, because as I mentioned earlier, there are skin product companies who make their products microplastics free, and they have a loyal following and their business is thriving. So it can't be bad to not have these ingredients. But also, I'll share a personal note with you, and that is my partner and I, we actually make our own skin products. So I'm not saying this because I don't sell this product. I don't market it. I mean, hell, my own family doesn't even know I make this. But I'm saying this because I have eczema, and I wanted to make a skin product that suits my skin, but also to say that from first-hand experience, I can tell you, David, that if I were to put you to a blind test between homemade skin cream versus a pharmaceutically made cream, you won't be able to tell the difference, proving the point that a lot of this plastics is simply unnecessary.
Well, in a sharing environment like this podcast, we're only sharing it with a few thousand other people. I'll tell you, we make our own in this house, which might not surprise you, but yeah, it's dead straightforward making your own. But
Absolutely.
I think you would be able to tell the difference between ours and the normal ones because they're a bit smelly and they've got all kinds of things in them. But it is very easy from going from raw ingredients,
Yes.
and
Yes.
yeah, and you know the shelf life and all the rest of it, so it's fine.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so one of the other websites that you document in your piece is the ecobeautyscore.com metrics website. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, fantastic initiative, I have to say. I was absolutely blown away. So the Eco Beauty Score was started just a couple of years ago, I believe 2021, by the Eco Beauty Consortium. And this is an independent group of individuals who actually said, we want to look at the life cycle analysis of cosmeceutical products. Okay, so life cycle means just like life cycle of plastics, manufacturing, distribution, use, and disposal. So the entire life cycle of a cosmeceutical ingredient. But they aim to do everything that is out there. So all the different creams produced by all the different companies, they're trying to do life cycle analyses out of all of them. The products may differ. They try and come up with a harmonized score, which they rate A, B, C, D, E. A for very good, E for not very good. But the key thing about this initiative, which is really, really very, very good, is that they have received cooperation, and they are working with the 70 largest cosmeceutical companies. I mean, take for instance L'Oreal, right? Market cap 128 billion. So they've got the giants on board, and the bottom line is they just want to have a really, really easy score, A to E, for consumers, so that they can pick out a sustainable skin product that's not going to harm the planet. Last I checked, though, David, I think they're just rolling it out. I'm only in Europe at this stage. I'm not sure whether you've come across any product with this scoring yet. But in summary, fantastic initiative. Highly support this. I wish that we could have the same thing within our dermatological products, because life cycle analysis is a really, really good initiative.
Yes, and this is it ties in with one of the strategic aims of the Climate Working Group of the EADV, which is that we are hoping to review the idea of creating a framework whereby you can interpret medications on the same basis, which is their life cycle, and also against their efficacy. And if you had something like the ecobeautyscore.com and fed into it efficacy and cost, you could produce a much more multi-dimensional assessment of a product, which could be relevant to a medical specialty like dermatology, I think, as well. So I think it's a very interesting approach to take, and it's very positive that you've got L'Oreal on board, and maybe other, well, not you, but they have got L'Oreal on board, and maybe other large companies in the cosmeceutical world. but we have the more active therapeutic world that needs to get onto it as well, because a lot of our products in the therapeutic sphere rather than the cosmeceutical sphere have got much of the same considerations, I think.
Yeah, David, I want to hug you for this initiative. I think it's excellent.
I'm not altogether sorry you're several thousand miles away then.
And so me, Dennis Niebel, and Misha Rosenbach actually wrote an article which has now been just fairly recently published in JEADV, specifically addressing this issue of carbon footprint analysis. So we've talked about life cycle analysis for plastics. We've talked about life cycle analysis on cosmeceuticals in this podcast, but that manuscript, which is titled Carbon Footprint Analysis, a Valuable Tool, we talk specifically about the point that you mentioned, especially, for instance, using atopic dermatitis as an example. We now have JAK inhibitors and biologics, okay? Yes, we know efficacy, but these are different medications with different environmental impacts. We make the point that the environmental impact should go alongside to side with efficacy, because everything is a balance of risk versus benefit. And we as doctors, that information will allow us to make well-informed choices. So yes, kudos to you.
Good. Okay, well, to everyone. I mean, it's a group effort.
Yes.
Now we ought to sort of start having the end of this podcast in sight. So first of all, I want to make sure there are some important things that you might want to say that you get to say. And then I'll start wrapping up with some other sort of concluding questions. But one of the things I do feel we ought to do is give people a kind of simple handle on this topic, because you've covered some very important things, both through the extraction of fossil fuels to their purification and use within different products, and how those products then break down and hang around. And so can you give a dermatologist 2 or 3 key things you think it would be helpful for them to put on their New Year's resolution concerning what they do in relation to plastics and the environment and their specialty of dermatology?
Yep. First thing is, if you are concerned about microplastics, the environment, look to join your local sustainability working group. So if you're in Europe, join the EADV Climate Working Group. If you are in Australia, we're always looking for members. We are called the Environmental Sustainability Group of the Australasian College. If you're in Germany, join Dennis's team, the AGN. And if you're in America, join the ERG, or the Expert Resource Group. So if you're passionate, we really need more numbers, because as an example, our working group, we have 8 members. Okay, if all 8 of us advocate for a small change, why would pharmaceutical companies listen to us in a population of over 28 million? Would likely get dismissed. So take on point number 1. If you care and this conversation excites you and you're passionate about sustainability, join your Dermatological Society Expert Working Group. The second take-home point is we are not helpless. Okay, so every single action that we do actually matters. And that is whether it is something as simple as scanning the product to determine whether or not they contain microplastics, or actually advocating for reducing the number of samples at conferences, in particular, tiny fingertip samples, which are essentially non-recyclable and contribute significantly to environmental waste. Now, you may think that small little things don't add up, but I'd like to cite Dennis's work on this, where if you look at something like the EADV Congress, and if you use just very, very conservative estimates of say 10% of trade exhibits give out samples to only 10% of dermatologists, and each not receiving more than 10. We're talking within one conference, 500,000 to 1.5 million plastic items with carbon footprint of anywhere from 2.5 to 18 tons of CO2e. So join a working group. Your steps matter. And lastly, I think reading the manuscript and listening to our podcast is in itself a big help, because now you know.
That's great, Eugene. Do you have any other wrap-up comments you'd like to make at the conclusion to today's discussion?
Well, no, I just want to say thank you very much for giving our manuscript the attention. And I also like to commend you, David, and Dennis, and the rest of the team at the EADV Climate Working Group. I know that your priorities at this stage is to look at how to make the EADV Congress more environmentally friendly, and initiatives like this will really help us and help minimize plastic as well as part of your initiative. So thank you very much. And I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope we get to meet sometime.
Or virtually or otherwise. It's great. No, thank you, Eugene. And yes, I think we should just acknowledge the EADV and what they've done and the journey they've been coming through over the last 5 years or so, even before the Climate Working Group was established. And the new CEO's got it close to her heart, as well as Martin Rocken, who was very helpful in setting up the Climate Working Group. And within it, although the running of the congresses is the most easily defined and quantifiable component, and the one over which we have greatest control, of course, the broader topic of serving our patients and running our clinics is actually the big, massive one that is really going to make a difference. So I think we have to keep that in mind. But on the topic of the congresses, I'd just like to highlight that it's traveling to the congresses that takes up about 80% plus of the carbon footprint of those congresses. So although I can't imagine we're going to knock that figure down a great deal with this new item, I just like to say there is a special project for cycling to Congress. And that is because cycling is just great fun. And if you get in the habit of cycling to your congresses, you will enjoy cycling elsewhere, which has got to have a good impact on both you and the planet. The EADV will be putting on a reception on the Wednesday of the 17th of September to welcome people who cycled to Paris. So think about it. We can't really plan everyone's route, but we can plan the destination. And the destination is the Paris EADV Congress, which we're all looking forward to, which you should attend by whatever means of transport you get there. And there'll be more information coming out about this soon. And there'll be a Strava community run for that project. So do think about it. However far away or close you live, even if it's just from the banlieue into the center, we're okay with that. So I look forward to seeing you all at the EADV in Paris, and maybe not you, Eugene, because it's a bit too far of a hack. But thanks very much for your time this morning, this evening, and any other time you can listen to these podcasts. And thanks to Sarah and the EADV for putting this on. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. And if you haven't already, please make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, follow us on Spotify, or otherwise you can find us on any major podcast provider. We appreciate you joining us and look forward to presenting more interviews on other important topics. If you're a regular listener to our podcast, we would love to hear from you. Your feedback will help us improve the show and develop episodes that you're interested in hearing. To participate in the short survey, simply follow the link in the show notes of this episode. Thank you for your support. It means a lot. Until the next episode, take care of your skin.